Hi, Joe Cerrone.
And Alan Rosen.
Welcome to CAD 134, Basic AutoCAD for Interior Design. Alrighty, so as we take a look at the course shell in D2L, in our calendar, we're running our weekly Zoom classroom meeting. We have our recording from last week. Last week, we worked on the hotel floor plan. And in that drawing, we created a floor plan of the hotel. And the next exercise in the textbook is to create this conference room drawing. Back to the main splash page. Over here in the content area, Module 5, the learning objectives are to be able to measure distance and angles between objects, measure the radius of an arc or a circle, obtain drawing information. Essentially, we're looking at analysis commands, and we use these quite a bit to be able to check measurements and things like that. And then we'll look at some additional CAD commands, like using the fillet and chamfer commands, and then additional modify commands like move, copy, rotate, and mirror. We can look at the array command as well. And so as we take a look at the exercise, we'll be working on the conference room from the end of chapter 5. And then part of the exercise is to draw the door detail. And then as a bonus, we have this conference room chair that we can draw. Here's the video lecture for chapter 5. And so if we click on that, and go to our YouTube channel. And we basically go through the AutoCAD for Interior Design chapter. And we're going through things like how to work with the distance command. And so first off, I always like to set up the computer system, going through our standard drafting settings like grid and snap, polar tracking. And then as we go through and we look at what the chapter covers, we're looking at different inquiry commands like listing properties and lengths of lines. And then we also go through things like how to create these different constructions like tangency and filleting. And so what we try to do with this course is to be able to make visual representations of the textbook concepts. Things like how to add chamfers and fillets to rectangles. And so we'll go through and show how to chamfer that and then the different options within those commands, since CAD is a visual type of process. Alrighty, and so that's the outline of the chapter. Back to the splash page or back to the module 5. And then if we take a look at the exercise itself, it's this exercise of this conference room. And so we're basically going to draw this conference room. It's 24 feet by 16 feet. I've got the drawing up here on the screen. And we're going to draw that using the B-size title block. And so you can see I have a representation of the drawing in what's called paper space. And when we work in paper space, we have this icon down here in the left-hand corner that looks like a triangle, and it is a paper space icon. And then model space is where we create the geometry for the drawing. And so we have the walls on the wall layer. If I click on it, and then if I right click and go to quick properties, we can see that the layer is called wall. And so as we work with our CAD systems, we want to use these different standards. We want to use different layers. And so we want to use a layer for dimensions. And so if I click on one of these dimensions, and if I right click and go to quick properties for that, I can see that it's also on a layer for dimensioning, and it's a dimension. And then as we go through and we look at things like analysis commands, what will happen is facilities people will look at things like the door openings. And we have a dimension on this, but if we wanted to do an inquiry command, we could measure the distance. And so we can measure the distance from, and I like to use object snaps. And so here's my O snap. And remember, O snaps are used to grab endpoints, midpoints, centers of circles, and things like that. And so we want to make sure that we have our running O snaps on. And then when we do these inquiry commands like distance, what we can do is we can then calculate the distance between the door. And you can see it says 3 feet. But let's say, well, how much room or how big is this table? Well, the table is 4 feet by 12 feet, but let's say that that information wasn't given. You could just put a dimension on it. One way, you could come over here and just put a dimension on it from endpoint to endpoint, and it should list that dimension out. We could do that again with another dimension. Again, you want to use endpoints. And we can list that out. Another way that we could calculate that information is to be able to use these inquiry commands. So I'm going to delete out those dimensions. And then here's our utilities. And so when we work with these different utility commands, we can go and calculate out distances. And just like I used for the dimension, you can just go through and calculate that that's 12 feet, and then you don't have to worry about erasing the dimensions. Another very useful command is to be able to calculate the square footage of the room. And so let's say that we're going to put carpet in this room and we want to get an estimate for the cost of the square footage. We can go into the measure area command. And then what we can do is we can outline the room area. And so this isn't a difficult one to calculate because it's a square room, but it does a great job of being able to calculate perimeters and areas of rooms that aren't square. And so we'll go to this point here and then this point here. And what you can see is as I tag the different corners of the room to calculate out the area, and then I hit enter, it will tell me that that room is 385 square feet and that the room perimeter is 80 feet. And so these are just really useful for when we're calculating out things like square footage so that we can purchase materials like carpeting and things like that. All righty, let's go back to the main splash page. And so the exercise is to draw the conference room. The doors are 1 3/4 of an inch thick. We've given that information right here. And so here's that 1 3/4 of an inch by 3 inches. And if I'm going through and I'm grading this exercise, I'd come over in here and I'd go and I would do an inquiry command. And so I'd say measure distance, and then I would measure the distance using an O snap for endpoint and another O snap. And we can see that that door is 1 3/4 of an inch. And then if I go this way, I can see if the measurement is 3 feet. And it's probably a little less right here because of the
thickness of the door.
Yes, and so it's a 16th less. Is that a big thing? Not in the interior design world. We're not putting this on the space shuttle. But if we were, then we would need to bring the arc length back just slightly. And so we can do that with a grip if I wanted to. By pulling that like this. My computer is dancing on me a little bit here. I need a better graphics card. And then I can draw a line from endpoint to endpoint. And it's just a little bit. And that's the beauty of working with CAD, is that you can zoom in very close and get very detailed with your coordinates and how that drawing is laid out. And so this exercise will use a lot of offset and trim. We'll offset and trim the different lines for the wall geometry, put the furniture on layers for furniture. And so here's our furniture layer. And then we have another layer for the door. And then we have a layer for the dimensions. Once you have drawn and detailed, we're going to put that on the title block. And so we're going to go here to the floor plan drawing. And just as a review, if I double click in the viewport, I can then, I'm going to unlock this viewport. I can set up what's called the viewport scale. And so initially we may find we don't see anything in the viewport. And remember, this is what's called floating model space. And so when I hover my mouse over here, you can see that it says model. And that is the same as this model right here. And so when I switch over to paper space and I'm in a viewport, I'm in what's called floating model space. And what I need to do is find my CAD geometry. And so you can either double click the middle wheel on the mouse, or you can go to View, Zoom, All, and that'll find your CAD geometry. Now, this is great, but we want to dial in a scale that we can measure, because if we print this and we bring this to our facilities department, they're going to want to check to make sure that everything fits in the room. So what we would do is we would dial in a scale, and let's start with 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. And so we'll bring that down to 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. And that works terrific. It fills up most of the title block. If I wanted to try a larger or a smaller scale, I can bump that up a little bit, but you can see it's not going to fit. And so we want to dial in the proper scale. And then we want to set up that information on the title block. I think I'll just put it here in the middle. We're not going to do too much with the modeling at this point. And then what I'll do is I'll lock that in place. And so now that viewport scale has been locked in at 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. And so if I'm using a scale, I can measure that drawing based on the printout. Double click outside of the viewport. And now we're in paper space. The paper button will be on right here. And so this is called P space. If I hit it again, now it's in M space. And if I hit the F2 key, just as an FYI, oh, I can't, I guess it's got something else on here. Continuing. There's something called a flip screen in AutoCAD, but somehow my virtual controls for the video meeting seem to be interfering with that. But again, if we double click outside of the viewport, we're in what's called P space, and you can see P space. And then if I type in M space, now I'm in the viewport, P space. Now I'm on the title block. And so the idea on the title blocks is that you can edit them, put your name on it. Dial in your scale and your exercise information and the date, and then annotate the viewport detail bubble as well. And so here we have our floor plan and our scale for that. And you can then edit that. This one's correct, so we don't need to make any changes for that. All right. Once you have the drawing properly detailed and drawn, save it and turn it into the D2L assignments folder. Draw the doors and insert those. And then as a bonus, we'll create a next video after this one and show how to draw the details of the door. So that's the assignment for this week. You're to go through and read Module 5, Measuring Distances and Angles of Objects. Create the exercise of the conference room. We'll come back to this drawing and add additional details like video conferencing, phone systems, and chairs for the room, some plants and things like that. Draw the chair as a bonus. Here's the video lecture for Chapter 5. And here is a lecture on how to create the drawing of the conference room. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we're going to make another recording of the bonus exercise. Al, is there anything else that we want to talk about in our weekly Zoom classroom meeting?
No, we can do it in a moment afterwards.
Very good then. I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll post a second recording for the drawing of the chair.